Hi, my friends, Perspective here. I wanted to bring us up to speed to where we're currently at. Within the last few weeks, we've been exploring the wounded themes of consciousness and how we transition into the healing themes. And in the most recent episode, I explored the mapping across the wounded themes and the healing themes so that we have a more tangible resource moving forward in our journey. So, for every wounded theme, we have multiple healing themes that are mapped to that. And what this exploration did was help us zoom into the third step in the three-step practice of the inner work. So, the third step says release and replace. Release tells us about the specific goal, which is to heal, and the replace tells us about how we can access this release. And we have wounded themes of consciousness aspect as well as healing themes of consciousness aspect that are associated with release and replace. But back to the recap. On previous episode, we had spoken specifically on rejection and judgment. So for rejection, we have understanding and acceptance as the healing themes associated with rejection. Then for judgment, we have understanding, acceptance, and accountability as the healing themes associated with it. I also shared that as we heal these themes, we transition to the next themes upward into the scale in the themes of consciousness. So from the wound of judgment, when we heal, we start to take accountability, we start to see ourselves, we start to see our own shortcomings, we start to see the consequences of our previous actions, and then we transition into overwhelm. If you feel like you need more details, I would highly recommend that you go back to the previous episodes and just look through them. The description really does help you just navigate accordingly. And at this point, I just want us to take a deep breath before we get into the tea. Take a deep breath in, exhale, in, exhale. Enjoy. But yeah, let's get into it.
Earlier, we were pointing fingers outside. Now we're beginning to face ourselves and seeing ourselves for who we truly are. We're seeing the weight of our previous consequences. We're seeing the things that we've done. We're seeing how we thought, oh, we were fine, we were cool, that they did this to us. We also did this to people too, because again, hurt people. So as much as you think you're the victim here, ooh, you also did this to somebody. So at this point, we're taking accountability for the things that we're doing wrong and how we're perpetuating the hurt into the world. And now it gets overwhelming. It gets overwhelming because there is so much to handle, there is so much to do. We can't quite comprehend all the things that we've been doing. We're seeing ourselves bare for the first time. So it gets overwhelming. Now, with overwhelm, the healing to that, so that's like what it's working on, specific aspect of the healing theme. So the healing theme for overwhelm is acceptance and ease. So there's a transition from acceptance to ease. Acceptance being that you accept what is. You accept that there are heavy weights from the previous choices that you have made, and these are consequences that you now have to deal with. You don't run away from it, you accept it, because overwhelm automatically is underlined by hopelessness, right? You feel overwhelmed by all the things that's going on, and that alone, in a sense, you're running away from those things. But to accept the things means to actually see it for what it is. At the end of the day, those things are not going anywhere, right? So the healing for that is just to accept it for what it is. Accept that you were the one who made these choices and be compassionate to yourself still. Understanding that, again, you were putting forth what was given unto you. And in a sense, you didn't know better. So with overwhelm, you accept that, but more importantly, you accept the limit of the human condition. You accept your own limit. And this is how I'm sharing these things in terms of, a possible transition across the healing, and how from each healing it goes upward into the wounded themes, into other layers, right? But bear in mind that this could also play out in other areas of life. Like, it doesn't have to be this exact pathway. This is just my way of, making it like a storytelling, so that you think about these themes and there's a cohesiveness to these themes. In reality, it could play out anyway. You could have one experience having multiple themes, or you could have multiple experiences having one theme, and you could have multiple experiences having multiple themes, right? You could have like three themes in one experience, and so on and so forth. So life is unpredictable. The way things happen for me is different from you. But again, I want to use this as an example to really point out that flow, so that when we think of these things, there is this reference points in our heads that we could, just use and paint that picture. So I was talking about overwhelm. And the reason I said that prior is because overwhelm can also occur in like your normal day to day life. You can be overwhelmed with the work that you have. You can be overwhelmed because you have committed to so many things at the same time, right? So overwhelm is just hopelessness. But in this transition of things, we use overwhelm as when we're overwhelmed by seeing ourselves for the first time and all of the mistakes and consequences of our previous actions. So now we have to accept our limits of being human. We have to accept that we are limited. Our strength is limited. We can't do it all, right? And at this point, when we accept that, we surrender and we ask for help. That's the major thing about overwhelm. You have to ask for help. From asking for help, we're able to transition into ease and be in a more neutral space where it could really help us move forward. Remember what I spoke about with the pendulum, where we go from action to ease like that, and overwhelm being such a heavy thing, because now we're hopeless, right? There's that hopelessness coming up, and that's already an extreme. To feel hopeless is like, okay, there's nothing else left. There's a saying that says, where there's life there's hope. Where there's hope there's life. If you have hope, even though things are going the craziest way, you still have hope that something can change. But once you're hopeless, it's like that's defeat in itself. So hopelessness is extreme, and you need another extreme to kind of balance that out. So ease is what you want to ease into, and you want to ease into the rest of the transition, because if we can't get to that ease, then like it just feels again still back to that overwhelming state. But before we get to the ease, we have to accept the limit and we have to ask for help, so that we get help and we can ease into the transition as we move forward in the wounded themes of consciousness. When it comes to asking for help, I think that's very interesting because, again, we cannot do it all. And I had touched on this when I was talking about understanding as a healing theme of consciousness, right? The fact that even the understanding you've amounted to is not by your own power. It's through your means, you worked for it, but in its sense, you still had external help. So that really highlights how, as much as we are going on this journey for our own selves, it's a self evolution journey. There's still a need to reference the world. And we've seen how there's always that connection between the external and the internal, right? And so, as much as you're going on this journey for yourself, once you go on this journey, you change the world around you, you change your environment, you influence your environment in a different way, the same way that the environment influenced you from the beginning. So, again, there's this connection. And at this point, it really does highlight that there is a need to still get that external help, to still get that support system of some sort, right? And this could be through, whatever it is that you believe in to be a higher source of power for you. Like, I believe in God, and at this point, you can ask God for help. You can ask God to send help to you, right? If that's what you believe in. But asking for help is very important. And you could also ask for help through community, through support systems, through friends that understand, safe spaces. On my journey to, I I had to have help. Like, it was already overwhelming enough what I came to terms with. So I needed help of some sort, right? So again, having these assistants would really go a long way. And honestly, that's why I'm here. Literally, I'm not gonna go on this journey for you. This is your own journey. As much as I am talking about these things and, having conversations about this, it's your own work to be done. The only thing I can do is help, is support. And that really is what this channel is about, right? Trying to help you live your best life. It's your own life. I'm just giving my POV, my perspective, so that it assists you in one way or the other. At the end of the day, the things that resonate with you are a reflection of the things going on in your own life. So it really does circle around you. But again, there is that need to still seek help. And that is what I hope to provide on this channel, just as much as I had help, even on YouTube, right? And that's why I'm like, okay, in a way, this is me giving back to a source of assistance on my own journey. So I'm hoping that just as I got help from YouTube, I can also help people who may not even know me, like personally, right? The people that helped me, I don't even know them personally, but they made such a significant difference in my life. And in a way, I don't have to know you personally for you to hear what I have to say or for certain things to resonate. So far, there's that resonance. That's it. If you see you in my stories, that's it. Help generally, that would be really great, because at this point you need help. And you know even I struggle to ask for help sometimes, and I'm reminding myself that I cannot do it alone. If if I want to go the journey and go far, you need assistance of some sort. So it's okay to ask for help. And yeah, I'm super independent, so I know how it feels like to be an independent person to an extent. So yeah, I get it, but at this point you do need help, especially when you're dealing with the theme of overwhelm. So the next theme is loss, right? Remember, with overwhelm, we didn't even want to face the problem. We didn't want to look at our past consequences, right? It was too overwhelming to even deal with. It was too overwhelming to even truly see it. And as we transition into the next theme, which is loss, we realize that loss is now taking a look at what has happened, right? We lost as an unexpected change. When you think about the transition that has occurred up until now, you see how there was a version of self that was existing with these woundings. And at this point, it's like that version of self no longer exists. So, in a way, you're trying to come to terms with this sudden change, right? And that brings us to the theme of loss. There's an unexpected change, and there's a perceived loss. There's a perceived loss of that sense of self, that version of self is no longer existing. You're now transitioning to this new version. So it's like, who am I without all of the things that I thought I was? Who am I without all of what I said? Oh, this is how I am, right? And you hear people say that, it's like, oh, that's just how I am. But as we move up, as we evolve as people on this journey, we realize that who we are is constantly changing depending on the context. As we expand, as we evolve, we change, right? So it's like there is that version of self that we're leaving behind. And because this is a perceived loss of, in some sense, because again, we're still very, you know, within the theme of rejection. And that's something I wanted to point out. I wanted to point out how rejection is such a foundational theme because it underscores other wounding themes. So, across other wounded themes of consciousness, there is an essence of rejection there because we're still coming from a place of wounding of the not true self. So it's like we have rejected our true self to now be in this space of wounding. So when you think about it like that, you start to see how, rejection really does seep into all these other areas of the wounded theme of consciousness. And I'm saying that because with the loss, we're now still looking at this change, this unexpected change, this perceived loss of that version of self that is tied to rejection. So, with the theme of loss, we have the healing themes that are connected to that. We have acceptance and ease, and specifically the what it's working on aspect. So, for acceptance, so we have self-validation, not result-driven validation or attachment to outcome. And that's something that acceptance really does hone in on. You put in all the effort, but you're not attached to the outcome. And that is a way to heal the wound of loss. Because with loss, it's saying things are changing, the version of self is changing. Things constantly change overall, even outside of this example, things constantly change overall, and there's that tendency to expect things to be a certain way, right? And I think that's such a human thing to do, to expect that things keep being a certain way, and expect, especially if you've experienced a sense of loss previously, there is that expectation for things to keep being a certain way, right? For things not to change. And when there's an unexpected change, it becomes so core that there's that regret, there's that clinging to the past. And, essentially you are still holding on to the outcome of things, to the external play out of things, right? Because for something to change, it means that it's changing on an outward level. That's the loss that you experience. Because the loss that you experience is on that outward level, you're still in a way holding on to or attached to the outcome of things, or attached to like that external, you know. And when we're trying to heal that, we're being accepting, we specifically focus on that validation of self that is not attached to the outcome. And so anything can change on the outside, any unexpected change can occur on the outside. That doesn't have to affect how you feel. That doesn't have to, change your own perception of self. Again, when we accept that we're inherently worthy and we just are worthy, then we genuinely accept that anything can change on the outside and it has nothing to do with us. Whatever changing on the outside, it doesn't change our peace of mind, right? Because the idea of these wounded themes is that they take you from a space of having that peace of mind or being in such a happy place to being triggered and taking you back to that negative headspace, that wounding. So with acceptance, not holding on to outcomes or attaching to outcomes, it means that anything can change on an outcome level, anything can change externally, but you still feel worthy to exist. You still feel worthy. You still feel good about yourself, about your life. Yeah, it doesn't feel good per se, but maybe at first, but over time, when you reinforce this belief for yourself, it starts to be that way. And there are also bigger experiences, I completely understand that. So in terms of like grief, for instance, which is a big loss, like death, right? That's really heavy. So for sure, that's something that would take a while. But primarily, I'm even talking about changes that could be as little as a change in schedule or a change of plans. These are things that if you're coming from that unexpected change wounding, you're still attached to the outcome of things. And if anything changes on the outside, it affects how you feel on the inside. But reaffirming that acceptance and worthiness of self and validation of self means that you don't need anything on the outside to appear a certain way. You would just feel worthy of existing regardless. And with loss and acceptance as a healing theme to that, the second aspect of what it's working on would be accepting the limits of the human condition. And this is when we speak of death, right? Understanding that death in itself is like that's bound to happen. It's a natural part of life. And I know this can be a very touchy subject for sure. I completely understand. But again, that's a limitation of the human condition. And we have to accept every limitation of the human condition. That's part of it. As little as the tiniest change, as little as the tiniest limitation, we could be somebody not